The current economic climate is causing women increasing anxiety when it comes to money. 72% of women say they are currently stressed out about their personal finances. And to drive home that point, 63% of women are currently living paycheck to paycheck. Now let's compare those results to that of men polled in the survey. 67% of men say they are stressed out about their personal finances, though only 26% say they are very stressed, compared to 34% of women, and 54% of the men polled say that they are living paycheck to paycheck. So what's causing women the most stress? Let's take a look at some of the top causes of financial worry. Now, 57% say inflation tops the list. Then 42% cite overall instability in the economy. 39% say lack of savings. 35% rising interest rates, and number 5 is a tie. 29% point to medical and health care bills and aging as their top stressors. Now, men have similar concerns when it comes to inflation, economic instability, and rising interest rates, basically in line with those results, but only 31% of men list a lack of savings and 24% list medical bills as stressors. So that leads us to another key disparity here, another massive gender gap in emergency funds. That's something that Susie Orman is going to touch on in our next session. 57% of women say they do not have an emergency savings fund, compared to just 48% of men who don't. Sharon?
Julia, these are such sobering statistics, and I'm just wondering what is driving this. You've done a lot of work when it comes to women and leadership and closing the gap, the pay gap. What do you think is happening here?
Well, there's no single reason. There are so many different challenges, and it's really a complex challenge that requires complex solutions, and particularly when it comes to this gender gap in financial health. The first thing I have to point out is the wage gap. Women still, on average, make 82% that men make. And that's an even larger gap when it comes to women of color. Now, often the cost of care, whether it's child care or elder care, falls on women. And that often forces some women out of the workforce during their prime earning years. That also means their prime savings years. So when it comes to money, the other thing we have to point out here is there can be emotion and psychology when it comes to spending and saving, and certain things that you mentioned, Sharon, about the idea of risk that maybe women are less socialized to engage with.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you're saying we're about talking, that's one thing we don't do. You and I talk about it because this is what our jobs are. But a lot of women don't talk about money. We don't talk about what could happen if there is a recession, if there's a chance of a recession. How do women typically deal with recessions, and how can this one maybe be different?
Yeah, it's interesting because if you look back towards past recessions, typically during recessions, women actually tend to lose fewer jobs than men do. And that's because recessions typically impact construction and manufacturing jobs. And those are areas which tend to have more male employees. Now, if you look at the economic downturn during the pandemic, though, that was, of course, very different because it impacted service jobs, and women are more likely to hold service jobs. And on top of that, more women opted to stay home during the pandemic because of childcare responsibilities. So during the economic downturn of the pandemic, we saw much more job losses in terms of women rather than men. So in terms of this economic downturn that we're anticipating this time, it's unclear how it's going to play out and whether it'll follow those more typical pre-pandemic trends.
Well, Julia, you know, we have a number of people who are watching who are leaders themselves. They're entrepreneurs. You are the authority, having written a great book on When Women Lead, about what women need to do. You interviewed dozens of trailblazing women leaders. How are the leadership strategies that women typically deploy particularly valuable right now, considering all the financial stressors we're talking about?
Yeah, and I would say that the skills and strategies that women are more likely to deploy are essential right now with all the uncertainty that exists in our economy. Now, the pandemic really shed light on the importance of the ways that women are more likely to lead. That means leading with empathy, leading with vulnerability, a communal approach, pulling on perspectives from across their organization rather than a top-down approach. And I was really interested to learn, Sharon, that during times of crisis and uncertainty, employees would rather work for a female boss, and that's because of the fact that women are more likely to communicate with clarity and with empathy, and also to draw on the perspectives of their entire team rather than to make more top-down decisions. So I think what's key here is that we're in a new phase of uncertainty, whether it's economic uncertainty or uncertainty about things like inflation. And I think that we have to really turn to these skills and strategies that female leaders have and all try to embrace them in ourselves, because this is the time to draw on the power of your community and also figure out sort of what drives your own personal superpowers.